there is something inside of all of us. It's called eternity. In fact, God has written into the hearts of all humanity eternity. All of us have a sense that when this physical life that we live right now is over, there's something beyond this life. If you don't believe it, you have wondered about it. I don't know where you are in the faith journey with God, but I think everybody contemplates this. Atheist or agnostic or Christian or follower of Christ, whatever you want to call yourself, we all have a sense that when this life is over, there's something beyond this life. And if you wouldn't admit that verbally, you've thought it mentally. And there's something beyond this life when it's all over. And I think there's this thing within us that says, if there is a God, if you don't profess a God, if there is a God, how can I know that I'm right with God so that when this life is over, I'll spend eternity with Him in heaven? Because I think from childhood on up, we have the sense that there's heaven and that there's hell. And heaven is for good people, and hell is for bad people. And I'm not a bad person, but I'm not necessarily good, or I don't feel good enough to be accepted by God or loved by God. So how can I know that I'm going to be right with God? And we want to know that we're right with God. We want to sense that God still loves us in spite of ourselves. In Romans chapter 4, verse number 5, Paul is answering a question for the church to which he writes. He's writing to the church in Rome. Most of those in the church were Jewish in background, and they understood what it was to obey laws and obey rules. And when you obey the laws and you obey the rules, you find access, you gain access to God. God demands this kind of obedience, and if you want to be right with God, you have to continue on with all the Jewish rites and rituals. When Jesus Christ was resurrected, God changed a lot of things in our approach to God. Easter Sunday morning, we might even talk about how there was this very thick curtain that separated common humanity from the most holy place where the presence of God was, and that was where the Ark of the Covenant was. And on the day and in the moment when Jesus Christ was resurrected from the dead, God tore that curtain apart from top to bottom and said, in essence, I now want nothing to separate me and my creation. I am moving towards you with love and with grace. Now, people in the early church kind of had a hard time with that because it was such a paradigm shift in thinking. And so into this, Paul writes, and we're going to look at the application for our lives today in Romans chapter 4, beginning in verse number 5. So this is kind of mid-thought where he jumps in right here. He says, however, to the one who does not work, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, to the one who does not work but trusts God, we'll talk about that as well, God who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. Now, I'll explain the verse here a little bit. And I realize it's mid-thought for Paul. It can be hard to understand the context of this, but let me explain it to you. He uses the word justify in there. Justify is a legal term. If you have ever been convicted of a crime and stood before a judge in a court of law, the words you long to hear from a judge is, based upon the evidence at hand, I find the defendant not guilty. That'd be a good feeling. Despite the charges, whether they were true or not true, whatever the case might be, I would want an advocate. I'd want somebody there that would argue my case. And I would love to hear the judge pound the gavel on that big wooden desk and say, not guilty. That would be the day for celebration, kicking your heels together and running out of the courtroom thinking, I am free, I am free, I am free. And it's a legal term that Paul uses there, justification. And who is it that God justifies? That's the question we have to answer. We're going to find some characteristics about the person that God justifies. There's 3 of them I can see in this one verse. The first thing that we have to understand from this verse is that God justifies ungodly people. I don't know if you've ever thought about yourself as being ungodly, but I'll share with you in a moment that all of us in this room are ungodly. That God, when He sent Jesus Christ into the world, sent Jesus into the world to shed His blood that ungodly people could be justified. The only people that Jesus died for were ungodly people. God didn't send His Son into the world to die for people who give money to the church. Jesus didn't come into the world and die on the cross to justify the Assemblies of God or the Catholics or the Presbyterians or the Catholics or the Baptists. God doesn't justify people who are generally nice people. God didn't justify people who bring lots of money or pay tithes to the church week by week. God doesn't justify people who try to abstain from certain things to prove themselves to be better or more holy than other people. The only people that God justifies are ungodly people. Ungodly people. I don't know if you've ever thought about yourself as being ungodly. We would have to say, well, Pastor, what's an ungodly person? It's a fair question for us to ask. What does it mean to be ungodly? I suppose a dictionary definition we would know if we looked up God in the dictionary and found a definition there, we'd say, well, yeah, I'm not all-powerful, and I'm not all-knowing, and I'm not ever-present in time, past, present, and future. I understand that about myself. So I wonder what Paul means when he says that we're ungodly. I think we could define it a little bit by saying somebody's un-American. If we know that somebody is un-American, we understand the context of that. If you're from America, you say somebody's un-American, it doesn't mean that they're from Canada or Mexico or Ghana. It just means that we have certain idealisms in America. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and we understand the whole context of that. We understand what it is to be an American. It's baseball, hot dogs, and apple pie, isn't it? And so we understand what it means to be an American, but we don't always understand what it means to be ungodly. Really, ungodly just means this. We don't want God messing with our business. Oh, we have an emergency call put into God once in a while. When there's a financial crisis or a diagnosis with our health, or suddenly there's a breakdown in relationship with a spouse or with somebody in the family. We cry out to God in moments of emergency when we're in desperate situations, but by and large, humanity would say, God, don't mess with my business. When I need you, I'll call you. And when God says yes, we say no. When God says no, we say, I'm going to do it anyway. That's ungodly. That's what it means to be ungodly. The incredible thing is all of us in this room. I'm ungodly, and you're ungodly. We know that if we make a vow, we should keep the vow. We know that it's wrong to steal, but we still steal. We know that it's wrong to tell a lie, but we still tell a lie. And if you don't admit that, you're lying. Okay, just checking. We know that we're supposed to be pure in spirit and heart and mind. Still, there's lust and greed in our hearts. We know that as we put together our taxes, 30 days from today is tax day, and we're not supposed to cheat, but some people will still cheat. And the amazing thing about all of those things is that it's not a slip-up. Oops, I accidentally lied. Oops, I accidentally cheated on my test. Oops, I accidentally deceived my parents. We're very deliberate and we're very good about being ungodly, aren't we? It's not just a slip-up. It's not a mistake. It's not an accident. It's fascinating how humanity likes to downplay those activities and saying, well, I made a mistake. You didn't make a mistake. You were ungodly and you sinned. Let's call it for what it is. And the incredible thing about all of that is it's not just an accident. And we have to admit that we're ungodly. Because before God can do anything in us, we first have to come to a place where we admit we're ungodly. Every year, the American Cancer Society spends countless dollars on warning us about the signs of cancer, skin cancer and colorectal cancer and all kinds of cancers. It's in print media, it's on your TV set, it's on brochures in the doctor's office hanging in the little rack on the wall. And people hear the announcements, they see the printed material. And people that have all the symptoms of cancer will refuse to go to the doctor because they don't want to hear the truth and admit that they have a problem. And so we just don't go. In fact, we sometimes like to go to churches that just tell us what we want to hear instead of sometimes what we need to hear. And I would propose to you that if I went to a doctor and I have something seriously wrong with me, I would really like the doctor to tell me the truth. Well, just take a couple aspirin, you're going to be okay. I don't think I want a doctor like that. You'll never be made right with God until you admit that you're wrong with God. That's kind of what it comes down to. Well, as I said, we're ungodly. And that's good news. Believe it or not, it's good news that we're ungodly. Do you know why it's good news? Because it puts us all on the same playing field at level ground. The president and a prostitute. The governor and a gunman. The lawyer and the lawless. The teacher and the terrorist. All of them are ungodly. And it puts us all at an equal need for the forgiveness of Jesus Christ. You see, God doesn't have any favorites. And I think there are people that maybe stayed home from church today. Maybe that you're watching online or you haven't come to church because you feel like, you know what? Church is for good people, and I'm not a good person. In fact, God must play favorites. You know who God likes the best? God likes those people that are in church every Sunday, that give money to the church, that teach in classes and take care of youth and do ministry to people at the nursing home. Those are God's favorites. Well, let me tell you about my life and my Saturday night, my Friday night. I don't think God likes me very much. I'd like God to like me, and I'd like to be at peace with God. If you knew about my divorce, if you knew about my marriage, if you knew what I said to the kids this morning in church or on the way to church, if God knew those things, I think that there are people that come to church and they're not really too sure who the regulars are, but whoever they are, God likes them better than He likes me, because I feel ungodly. That's one of the characteristics. That's one of the things that God justifies as ungodly people. The other part of what we see in that verse is that God justifies not just ungodly people, but unworthy people. Coincidentally, because we're ungodly, we're also unworthy of God's forgiveness. If we look back at the text, he says, to the one who does not work. You see, we think in order to be right with God, we've got to work. We've got to do something for God to like us more, to curry His favor. And this is so common to the American culture. This is so common to us because we know in America to get anything, you have to work for it. We're trained this way early on, aren't we? We're trained early on that when you're just a little child and you're in kindergarten or Sunday school, that perfect attendance earns you the little gold star on the calendar. If you miss a week or two, you get the silver, and maybe if you miss 3 weeks, you get a bronze, and if your parents didn't take you to church, there's no hope for you. You don't get any stars, you know. If you work really hard in school, you get straight A's, and you get put on the dean's list or the honor roll, and you get to give the speech before the graduation class while everybody else sits bored listening to you. If you work really hard, you get the promotion. You get the bonus. You get all the accolades. You get the medal. You get the ribbon. And we understand that. And unfortunately, this spills over into our thinking about how God must see us when we walk into the church building or just walk through life and think about God. That you know who God likes best? God likes the good people the best. The people that work for His favor. The people that are doing all the right things the right way. Those are God's favorites. And since I'll never accomplish that or achieve that or get to that place, I just don't even try. And it's unfortunate that we have so complicated the simplicity of the message to make people believe that in order to have the favor of God, you got to work for the favor of God. And Paul says, look, let's just revisit some fundamentals. All of us are ungodly and all of us are unworthy. We can't work for His salvation, but we think that we should. And God doesn't play the game that way. He doesn't move towards people for being good. He doesn't play by the same rules of humanity when it comes to finding grace and favor. Why doesn't God play by humanistic rules on who He loves and how He loves? Well, the answer is found in verse number 4 of the same chapter. Verse number 4, Paul says, "Now to the one who works, wages are not credited as a gift, but an obligation." In other words, we understand this on the 1st of the month or the 15th of the month. We understand this, that it's payday, and you get a paycheck. Your boss owes you that paycheck. There's a contractual agreement between you and the person for whom you work, and he's going to give you some money on the 1st or the 15th, and we don't look at it as a gift. It's what we deserve. He owes this to us, and when we get the paycheck, we don't run to the boss and throw our arms around the boss's neck and kiss him and say, "Thanks so much for my paycheck." And more than likely, we say, "Yeah, I deserve more than this, but I'm glad to have what I have." Because when he gives you a paycheck, that's an obligation. God loves you. That's a gift. You can't earn that gift. And why doesn't God play by the same rules that we seem to want to play by? I'll tell you why. Because God will not be in debt to anybody. God won't be indebted to anybody. God won't be indebted to anybody who thinks that they can work for his salvation. In fact, we read in Ephesians chapter 2 that we're saved not by works, but by the grace of God, so that nobody can boast about it. That's an amazing thing. I suppose there's people in here that could boast a lot more about their work for God than I could. I wouldn't stand a chance against some of you in the church if it came to works. But you see, works is not a means to salvation. It's rather the fruit of salvation. It's not to be in right relationship with God. I'll work for God because I'm in right relationship with God, and I look at humanity and people totally differently now. It's not to gain access to God. God wants to move towards us, and he did. While we were still sinners, ungodly people, Christ died for us. He owes us nothing, and we owe him everything. Well, two of the characteristics are that we're ungodly and we're unworthy. And we're unworthy because we're ungodly. So, Pastor, how are we going to make this right with God? How do I know that I can be in a right relationship with God? I mean, I've heard so many different stories and so many different, it doesn't really matter your faith background. I'm just going to take this from the Word today and make it as simple as I possibly can. Let's go back to verse number 5. To the one who does not work but trusts God, who justifies. Justifying the ungodly. Their faith is credited them as righteousness. To trust God. What does it mean to trust God? What does it mean to believe God? I think you could go to the gas station across the street and you could ask the person behind the counter, "Do you believe in God?" And they would probably say, "Yeah, I believe in God." Do you trust God? That might be a different answer to that question. We say believe a lot. I believe it's going to rain tomorrow or snow tomorrow. I believe the Minnesota Vikings will win the Super Bowl next year. I wanted to see if you were still with me today. What does it mean to trust God? Think of it like this. Some of you have been to the doctor because there was something physically wrong with you that a bottle of aspirin or a Band-Aid wasn't going to fix. You felt a lump. Something going on inside of you. Something is wrong internally within you. And much like anybody, there's this resistance to go see the doctor and have the doctor do anything about it. If you're married, you wish you could do something for your spouse. If it's your child, you wish that you could fix the problem. But the problem is beyond the scope of your capabilities. And so you lay down on a bed in a doctor's office. And you're in pre-op, and they get you all ready, and then they wheel you into OR, and they put a mask over your mouth and ask you to count backwards from 100, and they use the same kind of poison on you that Africans use to kill monkeys with a blow dart. Isn't that great? I encourage you here. And all you can do in those situations is trust the doctor. You're not in control. You're sedated. You trust the doctor. If you've been in a situation where you had to go back to the court of law Somebody wants to sue you, or there's something that pertains to the law, and you're involved. It's about you. If you tried to defend yourself, you would look utterly helpless and ridiculous. And so you hire a lawyer. And the lawyer stands behind that table with you. The lawyer studied years. He's studied law. And he knows the law. And he's there to defend you. That's why you pay him $200 an hour, because he apparently knows more about the law than you do. And all you can do with your future in that legal case is trust the lawyer who stands there with you. You're not in control. You're not in charge. You can't control the outcome. You trust him. Sometimes we do this in friendships and relationships. When we have a depth of relationship and friendship with somebody, we trust them so much, we might share with them information that we would tell nobody else. We will trust them with information, or we will trust our future to them. We just believe that what they say is going to be true. About 100 years ago, when Robin and I were dating, we were on our way to Watertown, South Dakota for the very first time to meet her. I'd met her parents before, but we're on our way down to her hometown. Coincidentally, her brother's here today. My sister's here today. I think they're ganging up on me. I don't know what's going on, but we're on the road. We're traveling in Robin's 77 Chevy Bel Air, metallic pea green with a white top. It was great. We're somewhere between Bismarck and Jamestown on the interstate. Robin, I really did like her, and I really sensed the future. But guys, the whole afraid to marry, the afraid to commit thing. Guys, don't raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. She says to me, "So, are you going to marry me or what? Because if you're not, I need to know, because I want to get on with life." I was so mad. I was so mad. She knows I was so mad. So mad. So mad. I spit and burned a tree alongside the road. We got to Watertown maybe 2 o'clock in the morning and had a date together the next day. I think maybe that night or the night following, we went for a boat ride with her other brother, Lake Kempesca. What a beautiful evening. Just a glass covering over the waters. We went out and the sun was setting. Beautiful night. We went back to her mom and dad's house, and there in the basement of the house, I said, "You're probably not going to believe me when I ask you this, but will you marry me?" She said yes, obviously. Next month is 27 years. And the next morning she went upstairs and she told her mom, "Chris proposed to me." I was not a part of that conversation. And her mother, "Where's the ring?" I didn't have a ring. I'm impetuous and spontaneous. A ring? Like, what? A ring? And, honey, you're just going to have to trust me. And she did. And she has. That's what it is to trust God. You just trust. Because you really don't have a whole lot to bring to the table when you're ungodly and you're unworthy. All that you can do is say, "God, here I am." There's a hymn that used to be sung in the church years ago, "Just as I am," without one plea. Like, I've got nothing to bring to the table. I mean, I went to church on a Sunday and a pastor told me just how ungodly I was. I thought it was I felt pretty good about myself until he started picking on cheaters, liars, and people that break their vows. And then I realized I'm maybe not as good as I thought I was. No, God never justified one nice person, one good person, one regular church attender. God justifies the unworthy and the ungodly. And that's His part. And our part is to say, "God, then I am. I guess if that's who I am, I need to trust you. I really don't have anywhere else to go." The other side of this that I kind of see happening sometimes, if God died for the ungodly and the unworthy, what can creep into people sometimes, and I believe this is where some people really push back from the church. is that some people in the church have discovered what it is to be ungodly and unworthy. They discovered at some point in their life what it was to really trust in God. And they started out so excited in a passionate relationship with God. And they saw their lives completely changed and transformed. They were so excited about it, and then that excitement turned into something that would be like, well, why doesn't everybody want to live like this? And so they were so excited to tell other people, you need to trust God like I trust God. And then as that journey with God began to continue on in their life, they no longer were excited about telling people that you need to trust God with your life because we just bring nothing to the table and God has everything to bring to us. Instead we started to realize that because of what God has done for us, or maybe without realizing what God has done for us, my life is so vastly different than the other kind of people in the world. Do all the things I used to do, but don't do anymore. And what can so easily happen for people who have been in the church for any length of time is we stop leaning on the righteousness of Christ and start looking to the righteousness of self and become say it with me, righteous. What a horrible place to be. When we begin to trust now in our own righteousness again to gain and curry favor with God instead of leaning on the righteousness of Jesus Christ. I love what Paul wrote in another letter to another church. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, he said that Jesus, who had no sin, became sin for us so that we become righteous in the sight of God. If I could just leave you with one thing, and we're going to be done in just a moment. In fact, I want to just take some time to pray before we go home today because I think we need to kind of do some correcting maybe in our spiritual lives. We need to connect with God for the first time or reconnect. If I could leave one thing with you today, it is, would you read the Word of God, and discover the simplicity of the gospel message and the salvation that God offers to you. It is not as complicated as some well-meaning believer maybe made it. It is not as complicated as some pastor maybe made it for you. It is not as complicated as some church or some denomination made it for you. It is very simple. We are ungodly and we are unworthy of the love of Christ, but Jesus moved towards us long before we ever moved towards Him. God moved towards us long before we moved towards Him because He loves His creation and He will not be indebted to His creation. He doesn't work that way. He has no favorites. God does not love one more than He loves the other. And if we just begin to move towards Him with just implicit, simple trust, we have equal access to the forgiveness of God like anybody else does. And it's not about works. It's about the grace of God. So let me just ask you a couple of questions and then we'll be all done today. Are you ready for eternity? Are you ready to go? Do you remember that little prayer you prayed maybe when you were a little child? Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Somebody came up with that little rhyme with a sense inside of themselves that I might not wake up in this life again. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but death is a reality. If you don't believe me, just join me at the cemetery later this afternoon. It's real. And I just want you to know that you can have peace with God. I don't care what church you join. It's not about church membership or church attendance or how much money you give. It's not about what you don't do and do. It's just about trusting God.